The wind howled like a wounded animal outside the Silver Pines Veterinary Clinic, lashing snow against the time-worn walls of the old building nestled at the edge of the forest. Inside, the air was heavy with warmth and the faint scent of antiseptic and cedar smoke. Maggie Lawson, 65 and comfortably weathered from a life spent healing animals, sat curled in her favorite armchair near the wood stove, flipping through a dog-eared copy of a veterinary wildlife journal. Her silver hair was pulled loosely into a bun, and a woolen blanket was draped over her legs. At her feet lay Buddy, her aging golden retriever. His muzzle was dusted white with age, and his breathing was steady, the slow rise and fall of a dog deep in dream. Occasionally, his paws twitched as if chasing memories across snow-covered fields. Maggie reached down and gently scratched behind his ear, her hand calloused from years of work, yet still soft with love. The clinic was quiet that night, the kind of deep, insulating quiet that only heavy snow brings. Outside, the storm raged across the small town of Aspen Hollow, Colorado, cutting off roads and muffling the world. Maggie had been up since dawn tending to animals in need, bandaging a horse's injured leg, vaccinating a litter of puppies, and nursing a hawk with a fractured wing. It had been a long day, and her body was ready to rest. As her eyes began to close, Buddy stirred. His head snapped up, ears perked. A low, warning growl rumbled from his chest. Maggie sat up instantly, alarmed. Buddy was a gentle soul, not prone to false alarms. "What is it, old boy?" she whispered, placing a calming hand on his back. Buddy remained tense, his eyes fixed on the back door. Maggie turned and squinted through the frosted glass. In the chaotic swirls of snow beyond, a shadow moved, then a shape, then two piercing brown eyes staring directly into hers. Her breath caught in her throat. "Willow?" She set the journal aside and rose, joints stiff with age and surprise. 3 years earlier, Maggie had found that same black bear, younger then, caught in an illegal steel jaw trap deep in the forest. Willow had been pregnant at the time, and though Maggie had freed her and treated the wound, the trauma had caused her to miscarry. For weeks, Maggie had housed the bear in a secluded enclosure behind the clinic, tending to her wounds with quiet dedication until she was strong enough to return to the wild. She hadn't seen her since. Now here Willow stood, taller, heavier, belly distended with new life. Snow clung to her fur and exhaustion clouded her eyes. Maggie reached for the door's latch. "Easy, Buddy," she murmured, her hand stilling the dog. To her surprise, Buddy stayed calm, watchful, but without aggression. The wind pushed the door open with a violent gust as Maggie unlatched it. Snow blew inside in a furious swirl, and through it lumbered Willow, slow and unsteady. Her massive body barely fit through the frame. She looked directly at Maggie, then collapsed onto the clinic floor. Maggie moved quickly, guiding the bear with soft murmurs and gentle hands toward the isolation room. Despite the danger, despite every instinct that screamed caution, Maggie saw something familiar and pleading in Willow's eyes. Trust. The same trust she had once built, now returned. Buddy followed, silently taking up a post at the doorway as Maggie prepared the room. Fresh straw, blankets, medical kits, warm towels. The stove crackled in the corner, casting a comforting glow across the space. Willow grunted and shifted, her breathing labored. "You came back to me," Maggie whispered, brushing snow from the bear's fur. "You knew I'd help." The next hours blurred into instinct and motion. Maggie worked with the steady hands of experience, delivering the first tiny cub just before midnight, a squealing wet ball of fur and life. She cleared its airways and handed it to Willow, who gently cradled it with her enormous paw. The second cub followed soon after, smaller but equally strong. Buddy, against all natural logic, remained close, watching intently. At times, he stepped forward to nuzzle Willow's paw or let out a soft whine when she groaned in pain. And each time, Willow allowed it. Maggie had never seen anything like it. By dawn, the clinic held something rare and beautiful, a family, forged in pain, stitched together by something deeper than instinct. Maggie sat back on her heels, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as she watched Willow nuzzle her cubs. Buddy curled up nearby like an old guardian. Itutin, a bear and a woman. Something sacred passed between them. And outside, the snow kept falling. The blizzard would go on for 8 days. Within the cozy isolation room of the clinic, time slowed and a rhythm took root. Maggie canceled her appointments and fielded only the most urgent calls. The locals understood. During harsh winters in Aspen Hollow, no one questioned a closed clinic. Few even attempted the journey through the drifts. Maggie, meanwhile, lived among her unusual guests. She kept meticulous notes, fed Willow-rich protein blends, and ensured the cubs stayed warm and fed. Their eyes opened on the third day, cloudy blue pebbles peering at the glowing world around them. Willow proved to be a devoted mother, never straying far. Maggie approached only with Willow's silent approval. Buddy, however, was granted full access. He lay curled in the straw with the cubs, let them crawl over him, and brought them his favorite tattered rope toy. Once, Maggie caught him gently nudging a wandering cub back toward Willow. No words, just instinct and love. On the fourth night, Maggie opened the door quietly for David and Emily. They stepped in, holding their breath as they gazed upon the unlikely scene. A bear, a dog, and two newborn cubs, sharing warmth beneath the soft light of the stove. David, the town's ranger, finally spoke. "Is that Willow?" "Yes," Maggie whispered. She remembered. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. "They trust each other." "Like a family," Maggie said softly. And in that moment, they all believed it. The days that followed settled into a peaceful routine. Snowdrifts outside the clinic windows slowly melted under the strengthening sun. The cubs, whom Maggie named Cedar and Juniper, grew stronger with each passing day, tumbling across the straw in uncoordinated play, while Willow kept a watchful eye. Maggie resumed some light appointments, though she carefully restricted visitors to the front room. Few knew what was unfolding in the back. Only those closest to her, David and Emily, understood the full miracle taking place. Buddy, once slowed by age, seemed renewed. He followed the cubs like a devoted uncle, bringing them his well-worn tennis ball and gently herding them back when they wandered too far. Maggie watched with a quiet ache in her chest. She had no children of her own, but here, surrounded by this mismatched family, she felt something deeper than motherhood, a sense of purpose. Then, just as quickly as peace had settled, it shattered. It began with the distant scent of smoke. Maggie first noticed it one evening as she prepared the evening feed. Buddy lifted his nose at the same moment, ears alert. The phone rang sharply, slicing through the quiet. Maggie answered. "Maggie, it's Sheriff Collins," came the urgent voice. "Lightning strikes started a fire near the western ridge. Winds are pushing it toward town. You need to prepare to evacuate." Her heart sank. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. You've got maybe an hour. Get moving." She hung up and ran to the isolation room. Willow was already pacing, her instincts stirred. The cubs were huddled together, whimpering. Smoke crept under the door frame, faint but real. Buddy stood protectively between the cubs and the door. Maggie moved to the back gate. It hadn't been opened in years. Rust had claimed the latch. Her fingers trembled as she fought with the key, then her shoulder slammed against the frame. Nothing. It was stuck. Suddenly, Willow appeared beside her, towering, powerful. The bear rose to her hind legs and crashed against the gate with her full weight. It splintered and flew open. Beyond lay the woods. Willow turned to Maggie, their eyes locking in a moment of silent understanding. "Go," Maggie whispered, her voice breaking. "Take them somewhere safe." Buddy barked once, then, without hesitation, darted through the gate. Willow followed, her cubs scrambling behind. But before disappearing into the forest, Willow turned back. That one long gaze said everything. Then she was gone. The fire never reached Silver Pines. A sudden shift in the wind and the tireless work of firefighters kept it at bay. But when Maggie returned after the evacuation, something felt missing. The isolation room was silent, the straw cold, and Buddy didn't return. Not that day, not the next. She left food out, his blanket, called his name. Nothing. Days turned into a week. Emily tried to offer hope. "He's smart. Maybe he's staying with them." Maggie nodded, but her heart ached. Had she lost him too? Then one morning, just as the frost began to loosen its grip on the valley, there was a scratch at the door. Buddy stood there, thinner, dirty, but very much alive. Maggie fell to her knees, tears streaming. Around his collar was a small tuft of black fur. He had been with them. From that day on, Buddy followed a rhythm of his own. Every few days, he would disappear into the woods, returning hours or sometimes a full day later. Trail cameras David had placed in the forest revealed what words couldn't. Buddy playing with the cubs, resting beside Willow, watching over them like a sentinel. He had become their bridge, between wild and human, between past and future. And Maggie, watching from her porch, understood. This wasn't just survival, it was legacy. Spring bloomed early that year in Aspen Hollow. The snow receded, giving way to soft earth and budding green. The creek behind the clinic, usually still frozen in March, ran fast and clear with meltwater. Wildflowers sprouted, birds returned, and the hum of life resumed. But for Maggie, something had changed. Buddy was no longer just her dog. He had become something more. A bridge, a messenger between her world and the wild. Though she never tried to follow him, she always watched as he trotted off toward the trees, disappearing into shadows and pine. Sometimes he returned muddy, sometimes with small scratches, but always with bright eyes and a wagging tail. David's trail cameras confirmed what Maggie had hoped. Buddy wasn't lost. He was living a second life, part guardian, part playmate. In the photos, Willow and the cubs were thriving. They played in clearings, climbed trees, dug for roots. And Buddy was often there, nuzzling the cubs, walking alongside Willow, even sleeping nearby. In one image, he stood tall at the edge of the frame, alert, as if keeping watch. "They've accepted him completely," Emily said one evening as they flipped through the latest memory card. "He's part of their circle." Maggie smiled, though her heart ached. "I wonder if he ever misses me while he's with them." "He always comes back," Emily reminded her. "He always will." Late that summer, while Maggie tended to her garden behind the clinic, she felt it, that familiar prickle of awareness. When she looked up, she gasped. At the edge of the woods stood Willow, massive and proud, her cubs flanking her like shadows. They were bigger now, almost grown, their coats glossy and strong, and beside them sat Buddy. He looked straight at Maggie, tail thumping once. Maggie stood still, barely breathing. Willow's eyes locked with hers, calm and steady. There was no fear, no desperation, just acknowledgement, gratitude, connection. After a few quiet moments, Willow gave a soft huff and turned. The cubs followed, and Buddy remained behind, watching them go. Then he trotted over to Maggie, nuzzling her hand like nothing had changed. She knelt and hugged him close. "You brought them to say goodbye, didn't you?" Buddy didn't answer, but she didn't need one. As autumn approached, the visits grew fewer. The forest claimed Willow and her children completely. Maggie knew that was right. She had never intended to keep them, only to help them heal. Yet Buddy's quiet comings and goings continued. A few hours here, a night there. Always returning, always carrying the scent of pine and wild earth. In those final golden weeks before the snow returned, Maggie often sat on the porch with her old dog at her feet, sipping tea and watching the forest. "We did it," she whispered to him one evening, brushing her fingers through his fur. "We helped them live. We helped them trust again." Buddy sighed contentedly, resting his head against her boot. And as the stars blinked into the sky over Aspen Hollow, Maggie realized she'd found something more than a miracle. She'd found meaning, a story of healing, love, and a bridge built from kindness. Winter returned to Aspen Hollow with soft grace, blanketing the woods in quiet white. The seasons had turned once more, and with them, so had the rhythms of life at Silver Pines. Maggie grew slower in her steps, her hands stiffer in the cold, but her eyes, always sharp, still looked to the forest with hope each morning. Buddy aged too. His muzzle, once dusted with gray, was now nearly white. His joints stiffened, and the length of his adventures began to shorten. But he still ventured out, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes only to the edge of the woods, as though watching for familiar shapes among the trees. Maggie knew the cubs, no, the bears now, were likely living far from her land. Willow had raised them well. They had grown world, independent, just as they were meant to. Yet deep down, Maggie believed they still remembered. Not just her, but everything. The warmth, the safety, the love. One particularly crisp morning, Buddy returned from a short excursion with a limp. Maggie rushed to his side, heart clenched, but it was nothing serious, just age and wear catching up. She brought him inside, laid him on his favorite blanket near the stove, and sat beside him, fingers tracing the familiar lines of his face. "You've done more in this life than most people ever dream of," she whispered. "You showed the world what love can do." In the weeks that followed, Buddy stayed close to the clinic. His forest days were behind him. He would sit near the door, gaze toward the tree line as if expecting a visit, but none came. Maggie didn't need them to. She knew they were out there, living strong, living free, and that was enough. Then one evening, as the first spring birds sang their cautious songs and the last patches of snow melted away, Maggie took Buddy's paw in her hand. His breathing was slow but steady. His eyes, though tired, still sparkled. "Rest now," she said softly. "You kept your promise. You never left them, and you never left me." Buddy let out a long sigh, pressed his head gently into her palm, and drifted into sleep. He didn't wake again. They buried him beneath the willow tree behind the clinic, the very one that had inspired a name and a second chance for a wounded bear long ago. David carved the stone himself. Emily planted wildflowers, and Maggie sat beside it each morning, coffee in hand, listening to the wind in the trees. The trail cameras remained. Every now and then, Maggie would receive an update from David or Emily, photos showing bears moving through the forest. One time, she swore she saw Cedar, grown and strong, with a flash of gold trailing behind him. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps it was something more. What she knew for certain was this: love had passed through Silver Pines. A kind of love that needed no words, no fences, no expectations. It had walked on four paws, padded through snow, and bridged the space between two worlds. And Maggie, who had devoted her life to healing, had finally found her own healing in return. The forest remembered, the bears remembered, and she would remember always.